Okay, everyone. Welcome, by the way. I'm going to give people 1 or 2 minutes to have some time to join the meeting before go ahead and get started. So I'd say I'm probably going to start at like 2:01, 2:02 time frame, and then I'll go ahead and get started for y'all. Okay, I am not seeing anyone else join, so I'm gonna go ahead and get started. The first couple slides are overview slides anyway, so if anyone does join in a little bit late, you're not gonna miss any information or anything like that. So, once I share my screen, I'll go ahead and get started. Okay, hopefully everyone can see my screen. Awesome. Oops. Okay. Give me 1 second. Okay, starting again. Sorry about that, y'all. Okay. So, hello, everyone. My name is Kai, and welcome to the Statistics Solutions webinar on navigating the IRB, or the Institutional Review Board. So this webinar will be recorded, so you can watch it back later. I believe that you will get it back within 24 to 48 hours, and you should get like an email link with the recording. Additionally, I have some information at the very end about our company, Statistics Solutions, and how we can help you with your dissertation process. So please stick around till the end for that. And then finally, at the end of this PowerPoint, right before all that information I just talked about, we're going to go through like a question and answer section. So if anyone does have any questions throughout the PowerPoint, please go ahead and feel free and like put them in the Q&A button or in the chat, and I'll get to them at that last slide. Okay. Let's go ahead and get started. Oh, maybe if it works. There we go. Oh, there we go. Okay. Sorry about that. So to start, we're going to go through an overview first. So to talk about today, we're going to talk a little bit about the history and ethical principles of the foundational documents of the IRB, right? So we'll get a little bit into that. Then we're going to talk a little bit about what exactly is the IRB, what does it entail, and why do we have it? Then we're going to talk about a few aspects of the IRB. And so those are privacy and confidentiality, informed consent, and assessing risk. We're going to talk a little bit about, aspects of each and kind of how you should write your IRB. Well, more like how you should incorporate these concepts into, the ethical concepts into your IRB. And then finally, we're going to talk about the review categories. There are 3 review categories that you could be placed into by the IRB for your study based on your level of risk. And so we're going to talk about those as well. Okay. So to start, the Belmont Report is a foundational document for the current human subjects. Human subjects, I can speak today, I promise, testing protections and protocols in the United States. So created in 1979 as a response to the many unethical research practices on fellow humans in the US and worldwide, the Belmont Report lays out 3 ethical principles to follow when conducting human subjects research. Those are respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. And then also it's not as important, but the Belmont Report was also created by the National Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects of Biomedical and Behavioral Research. So it's like a super long name, right? But basically what the Belmont Report, it was created, like I said, because of, some of the unethical experiments that came out of like, the Nazi experiments, the US experiments on, underrepresented communities, all that fun stuff. Well, not fun, literally the opposite of fun stuff. And so a group of people kind of got together and was like, how do we make human subjects research a little bit more ethical so that we're not hurting the people in the process of learning new information? And that's kind of the biggest thing for the IRB, is that we want to make sure that the human subjects who we are researching, their priorities come before anything else. Like, knowledge is awesome and research is awesome, and it's great that we get to do those things and we get to learn things from research, but humans and the protection of human subjects is first and foremost, no matter what, always. And so we're going to talk through each of those 3 ethical principles. So respect for persons, beneficiaries, and justice. So that's going to be the first part of this PowerPoint. So we're going to start with respect for persons. But respect for persons states that human participants are autonomous beings who are free to choose to participate or withdraw from a research study. So for the participants to be able to make that choice to either participate or not to participate, the researcher must provide participants with all of the necessary information of the study. That includes the purpose of the study, what the individual is expected to do, and the potential risks of harm that may occur due to the study. Additionally, respect for persons argues that those who do not have autonomy, such as children or prison inmates, they must have additional protection. So a lot of the times for children, additional protection comes with having a parent or guardian also sign off on this, right? For older adults, like I used to work with older adults who had memory problems, a lot of like dementia and Alzheimer's stuff. In grad school, I worked with those types of people. And they, while are autonomous human beings, a lot of them, especially if you do have dementia and Alzheimer's, your decision making, your rationality is a little not as great as it used to be. I think that's a nice way of putting it. And so a lot of the times it would be unethical for to ask these people just based right off the line to participate in these things if you don't know what their mental state is like. So a lot of the times with like Alzheimer's patients and dementia patients, you actually have to provide them with like an additional test, and then they have to actually pass that test, and it's like a mental competency test. I don't exactly remember what it's called off the top of my head. But basically a test to make sure that you're still able, to have sound decision making. And if you don't pass that test, then even if they signed the consent form and said, yes, I do want to participate, if you're not passing that kind of test, and you're within a group that needs those additional protections, then they're not going to be allowed to participate. But for everyone else who, does not need those additional protections or safeguards, basically all you do need to provide is just the necessary information of the study. So like I said, purpose, expectations and directions, and then any potential harm that may occur. And we'll get a little bit more into kind of providing that information a little bit further down in this PowerPoint. So we'll get to that in a minute. So next is beneficience. So beneficience refers to the idea of harm reduction. So researchers should do their best to maximize the possible benefits of research while minimizing the potential risks involved. So this means that the potential risks must be reasonable in comparison to the expected benefits of the information that we learned. So common risks in human subjects research involves psychological stress or embarrassment, or a little bit more problematic is breaches of privacy or confidentiality. Stuff like psychological stress or embarrassment, as long as it is not too bad, is acceptable as long as you have a reason for doing so. And so that's really what beneficence is. It's a balancing act between how bad is the risk here versus how much information are we going to learn and that quality of that information. So, you know, if maybe your subjects are just going to be a little stressed out, but you're learning, you know, the effects of stress on misinformation, and therefore it's kind of important to stress your participants out if you want to see how they're going to react to misinformation while they're stressed, then that is probably okay in terms of the balancing act. However, if you're really going to stress your participants out and maybe the study has nothing to do with stress, or maybe what you're learning isn't, you know, that important in the grand scheme of things, or maybe the stress that they're going to be experiencing is super high, like, you know, mind shattering stress, then it might not be worth it to introduce that kind of stress if there's not going to be a lot of benefits from that. And then, like I said, breaches of privacy and confidentiality are a little bit more serious and problematic in the grand scheme of things, because we don't want that personal information of our participants to be able to be linked back to the people who gave that information. So that would be a bad that would be pretty bad to happen. And no matter what, in terms of what you're learning from the information, breaches of privacy and confidentiality are usually almost always not going to fit within that balancing act that I'm talking about. And like I said, we're going to get into all of this and how it relates to the IRB a little bit later. And then finally is the principle of justice. So the principle of justice argues that the burden of research must be equally distributed, and that certain populations should not endure the harm for others to benefit from. So many studies in the past have ignored this principle. Most notable examples I mentioned earlier are the Nazi experiments on those in concentration camps, and the US government syphilis experiments, or the Tuskegee, I hope I say that right, Tuskegee syphilis study on members of the African American community by the United States government. These experiments were conducted on specific populations who were unable to say no. And yet the effects of that knowledge that we've learned have impacted much larger populations. And so because of these studies and many others like them, researchers have discouraged people from conducting research on convenient populations, such as students in your own classroom or prison inmates. Also, obviously, researchers are discouraged from conducting research on, you know, marginalized communities if the risk of that marginalized community is high. And so with marginalized communities, it can kind of be a balancing act, because, you know, say you're interested in doing research on, you know, the mental health of LGBT people, right? But, you know, that group of people are currently, you know, and have been a marginalized community, and so therefore we want to make sure that we are, again, it's a balancing act, right? We want to make sure that we're subjecting these people, this marginalized group, to a study, and we want to make sure that they're not in you know, having a lot of stress put on them, having a lot of these risks of harm put on them, just for the benefit of learning information as a greater whole, right? And again, we'll get more into this. So what exactly is the IRB? Well, the IRB, or an institutional review board, is an ethical committee in a particular institution. So almost every university has their own specific IRB made up of members from that university, as well as, if you're not at a university, you know, corporations who do research also have something very similar. And so, sorry about that. My uh, My brain just shut down for a second. Anyway, so they review research involving human participants for the ethical principles listed that we just talked about. So, respect for persons, beneficence, and justice, as well as their own guidelines that are outlined by each institution. So each IRB board is going to be slightly different. Like I said, they're made up of different people from different institutions, and everyone has an opinion that's going to be different, right? But as a general rule, the core rules and regulations are going to stay the same. So committees will approve, reject, or require modifications for proposed research studies. And we're going to get into that later as well. So when reviewing a research design, IRB committee members consider many different ethical guidelines and rules. One common rule in reviewing is the privacy and confidentiality of participants must be reasonably maintained. So this means that researchers have an obligation to give the participant control over what and how much information they share, which is known as privacy, as well as protecting the information that participants do disclose, which is known as confidentiality. Privacy, or having the control over the extent, timing, and circumstances one shares about themselves, can be breached in many ways. One way is through different research methods, such as observational studies, focus groups, and snowball sampling. Observational studies pose a threat to privacy if information is gathered without the subject's knowledge or consent, while focus groups cannot ensure privacy or confidentiality since participants may talk about what was discussed after the study ends. Additionally, privacy invasions occur if the participant finds the study questions to be too invasive. So questions about sensitive topics such as abuse, medication, or sexual behavior may serve to make participants uncomfortable. And studies that include these types of questions should include a warning or some type of disclosure that these questions exist in the consent form. Next is confidentiality. So confidentiality, on the other hand, is defined as the treatment of information that an individual has disclosed with the expectation that it will not be divulged to others. So one simple way of protecting confidentiality is to de-identify participants' information. And what this means is that you want to assign numbers to participants, or sometimes it's letters. I mean, it doesn't have to be numbers. Some type of participant identification information number that cannot be traced back to the name, email, phone number, or any type of personal identifying information back to the participant. So basically, we use participant numbers or participant IDs as a stand-in for, participant names or emails. That way, when someone's looking at the data and you see that participant 55 has, disclosed that they were abused in this situation or in that situation, you can't basically go, oh, well, participant 55 is actually Margaret Smith from so-and-so. Like, you don't want to be able to do that. You don't want any of the readers or any of the researchers to be able to do that. And so in that case, de-identifying the data can be almost crucial to protecting that confidentiality. Additionally, how the data and information will be protected should be outlined in clear writing in your consent form. So the most common form of protecting data and information is to keep it private in some sort of filing cabinet if you're feeling old school, or like a shared drive where only so-and-so has access, or only a certain amount of people have access to that shared drive. Basically only allowing those who are essential to access that information. And then kind of going off of privacy and confidentiality is the consent form. So a main aspect of the IRB is informed consent. This is the idea that researchers must gain consent from participants when running human subjects testing. So this consists of two separate parts. So firstly, that the first part is that the researchers have an obligation to inform participants of all key information in the study. That way they are able to make an informed decision on whether or not to participate. So this means that participants should be reasonably informed on the study's purpose and procedures, the potential harms and expected benefits, how privacy and confidentiality will be maintained, and any incentives that they receive from taking part in this research. Additionally, researchers should provide a statement indicating that the study is voluntary, and they should also include some sort of contact information of the head researcher so that if any type of participant has any questions, they're able to contact the head researcher directly. This information should be presented in a clear and simple manner so that anyone who is not familiar with the nature of your study would be able to understand what exactly they're going to be asked to do. And participants should also be given ample time to read this document and decide. So you're basically not allowed to put a time limit on them. If they want to take 2 hours to read the consent form, it might suck for you, but especially if you're doing an in-person interview, but they are perfectly willing to take as long as they want to go through that document and decide whether or not they want to, participate or not. And then so the second part of informed consent is that researchers then have to provide some sort of documentation or proof that every participant within their study consented to the study procedures and requirements. So this is usually obtained just by having someone sign a consent document. Sometimes if it's like an online format, a lot of the times you won't have to sign it, but you'll have to click a button saying like, I've read this and I feel fine. For participants, though, who would not be considered autonomous, such as children, additional safeguards should be set in place to ensure that they are able to consent to the best of their ability. This can include tests to determine mental competency, kind of like what I was talking about before with, my work with people like older adults who are dealing with dementia and Alzheimer's, and or requiring consent from a legal guardian or caretaker. So a lot of the times not a lot of times, every time with children under the age of 18, you have to get a legal caretaker to sign off on to work with children, probably for obvious reasons. Okay, so next is identifying and minimizing risk. So the level of risk of a research study can be determined by assessing the likelihood of experiencing harm along with the severity of the harm should it actually occur. So a researcher should consider the situation and time frame of the research, as many sensitive topics can cause harm if asked in areas in which it is taboo or illegal. Additionally, the subject population itself should be accounted for as well, such as vulnerable or underserved populations who are at higher risk. Therefore, the goal of a study should be to balance the potential risks with the expected benefits of the information learned. So this is going back to that IRB principle of beneficence here. We want to make sure that we're doing that balancing act of, well, if we're going to risk these participants dealing with stress, then, is the potential benefits of them dealing with that stress worth the stress that they're going to receive and deal with? And if it's low levels of stress, probably worth it. if it's high levels of stress, like something from a really good example, I think, is the Ash shock experiment. Or no, it wasn't Ash. Was it Milgram shock experiments? I believe it was the Milgram shock experiments. I think Ash was the conformity test. But the shock experiments are highly unethical. If they were to be ran today, I highly doubt that stuff would get past an IRB. Mostly because participants who were in the Milgram shock experiments, they reported having long-term stress impacts from this experience. A lot of them didn't even get debriefed after the fact, so a lot of the times they weren't even told that the person behind the screen was okay. Which I don't know about you, but if I thought I shocked someone to death, I would really want to know if they were okay afterwards. And if I didn't know if they were okay afterwards, I don't know how great I would be doing for a long time after that. And so, if you are going to introduce that kind of stress that is, severe stress, in that case, what are you doing to protect those participants? Are we, debriefing them afterwards, letting them know that they did not just kill a person with shock? Are we giving them resources to check in on if they feel as though they need therapy? Are we having a therapist on standby for participants who may go through some sort of mental breakdown? Or is there a way to do this study without stressing the participants out so incredibly much that they do feel like they need therapy afterwards? There are levels to stress. Some stress is good, some stress is incredibly harmful. And so we want to make sure that if we are introducing any sort of potential risks, they're not so harmful for participants to go through. And if they are, and they're important that they're harmful, we really better have some good safeguards in place for what happens when the participants have to deal with that harmful stress. And I kind of went off on a little bit of a tangent there, but I think it's important to mention. And so, like I was saying, meaning if there are very little benefits to using an abused population, like I said, we're doing a balancing act here. So if there are very little benefits to using an abused population, the risk of re-traumatizing them for your study may be a little too high. However, if maybe a researcher plans to deceive their participants to learn a new truth about human behavior, and that deception is, not super crazy, it's something along the lines of like, here, look at this picture. Oh, and here's another picture, and it's slightly different than the first picture. But we're not going to tell you it's slightly different from the first picture. Technically, that's still a deception, but that's not a crazy deception. That's a level of deception that I think we as humans just deal with every day on the internet. And so it's a little bit more okay to do something like that, especially if we're maybe learning what happens if we deceive people when they're really stressed out, or maybe what happens when we're deceiving people and then, they're introduced to maybe some misinformation, or we're just learning some sort of new information about human behavior. Then that level of deception may be okay. The level of risk for each study is then examined by an IRB committee, and its members are going to determine if the study's risk of harm is acceptable. They're then going to make suggestions on how to change the level of harm if necessary. So additional safeguards such as removing participant identifiers from the data, or obtaining consent or additional consent and confidentiality forms may be suggested. A really good example of this from my own experience is my friend from grad school. His name was Jimmy, and he wanted, it's a very interesting study, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about it because I think it's fun. So his study was the idea that humans like to anthropomorphize or assign human characteristics to inanimate objects. So we like to anthropomorphize a lot, right? And we also like to, similarly, we like to give personalities to animals. You know, animals don't act like humans, but I certainly think my cat can understand me and knows when I want him to get off the counter and doesn't do it because he's a stubborn little jerk. And he's not really, he's an animal, but you know, it's fun to anthropomorphize a little bit. And as humans, we do that a lot, right? And so his specific study was determining whether or not the level of anthropomorphization, is that a word? I don't know. And whether or not, you know, what we're willing to do when we do that, right? So he had people play with bugs, which is disgusting in my opinion, but it was pill bugs, so the little roly-poly things. And basically he wanted them to name the bug. So he had one group of people name the bug and play with the bug, and then another group of people, they did not name the bug. They just had to interact with the bug, but they were not allowed to name it. It didn't have a name. It was just like bug number 2 or something like that. And so then after playing with the bug, both groups of people, this was his original plan at least, both groups of people were then asked to kill the bug. They were told, you have to kill the bug now. We're going to put it in a little grinder, like a bug grinder, or I don't know, some sort of, I think it was some sort of like food grinder or food processor type of thing. And he basically wanted to kill the bugs in front of the participants and see how, you know, they also had money involved in the study, and it's like you could pay to not kill the bug, and that was his like dependent variables, like how much money were you willing to pay to not kill the bug, basically. And it, you know, they didn't get to keep the money, and it wasn't their money or anything like that. But basically, I think you can, you know, from me talking, can kind of understand why the IRB was like, absolutely not. And so the IRB was like, no, you're not going to traumatize these people. You're going to get them to name a bug and then kill the bug right in front of them. That's, you know, really traumatizing, not okay. The IRB was like, absolutely not. And so he actually had to, you know, he had submitted that to the IRB, and he actually had to change his study. They, you know, they contacted him and they said, let's, you know, talk about ways that we can make this better, make this so that it's not as completely traumatizing. Although in my opinion, just playing with bugs is completely traumatizing, but I would have never signed up for a study like that anyway. If it says bugs in the title, I'm out. And so what he ended up doing, I think, was he changed his study so that I believe they didn't actually kill the bug. They just lied to the participant and pretended like they killed the bug. So they put something fake, like a bean or something, in that food processor, and then they food processed the bug. And then they let the participants know afterward, or food processed the fake bug. It's not a real bug anymore. And then they let them know afterwards that the bug is okay, the bug is alive, we didn't kill the bugs. And that way the IRB was a lot more okay with introducing that level of risk, because the participants are still stressed out because they think the bug's going to die, but the bug's not actually dying, and they're let know afterwards that they have been deceived. And so it's a little bit still stressful. There's still like a level of harm there, because it was almost impossible to get around that level of harm for what the study was asking. But you don't have to kill the bugs in front of someone. You know, you can just lie to them and tell them that you did it anyway. And so that's kind of a really good example of identifying that risk and then you know, doing your best to minimize that risk. Okay. And then finally, the IRB has once the IRB has reviewed, I swear my brain is not working today and I can't speak, but once the IRB has reviewed the contents of your research study, they're then going to process your experiment under 3 separate categories. So there's an exempt review, an expedited review, and a full board review, also known as a convened review. Excuse me. research that is reviewed as exempt are categorized as studies that involve no more than a minimal level of risk than a participant or than someone would normally experience in the everyday world. Therefore, they do not need further review from the committee. An exempt review is the easiest. It means that they've reviewed your study and they don't think that there's a lot of level of harm here. If there is any level of harm, they feel as though you have appropriately addressed it within your study already, and there's no more comments that they really have. This is the best case scenario because it's probably the shortest scenario in your IRB, especially since IRBs can kind of take a long time. Depending on the institution, IRBs either meet once a month or twice a month. It really does depend on where you go to schools. I mean, I don't know, maybe in some places they meet like every week, but in my experience, they don't. So in my experience, they usually meet once a month or twice a month. And that's when they really kind of go through each study and they talk about it and they make suggestions. So if you've got an exempt review, they've met once, they've talked about your study, you're good to go, and you don't really need to really do too much else. Next is an expedited review. So an expedited review often involves some level of risk, but this risk is to a minimal degree. So in this case, a few IRB members will review the study procedures, and then they're going to make suggestions to minimize the risk. So kind of like that example that I was telling you earlier, where it's like, oh, we're deceiving participants. Maybe we should have some sort of mental health resources at the end. Oh, we're stressing our participants out. Maybe we should debrief them at the very end, kind of thing, right? Finally, a full board review, or also known as a convened review, involves research that poses a significantly higher risk than what would occur in a participant's day-to-day lives. So in this case, the researcher may have to make significant changes to their actual study, to the procedures of their study, to obtain approval to run the study. And so both an expedited review and a full board review are going to take a little bit longer than an exempt review. Expedited review should take no more than like an additional, maybe month, because what you're going to do is they're going to say, oh, hey, just add this item to your consent form, or, oh, hey, just add that you're going to provide, therapy resources or something like that. So for example, I had an expedited review. I decided that I was going to deceive my participants. Basically, I was going to stress them out. I was kind of doing a double whammy, but I was looking to see if stress impacted and stress or timing impacted how susceptible people were to misinformation. So not only was I deceiving them with the misinformation, I was stressing them out with the actual stress timing. And so I just didn't include that in my consent form originally. I didn't let them know that there was a possibility of them being deceived. So they looked at my study. They were like, hey, you're kind of stressing them out a little bit. Maybe you should add to your consent form that is a possibility here. And so I added that to my consent form. I added a couple more things to the actual study, and then I resubmitted. So I think it took me about 2 months with an expedited review, because once I resubmitted, they just looked over it again. They were like, okay, you're good, right? Full board reviews, those are going to take probably the longest. That's because you're probably with a full board review, you're probably going to be submitting multiple times. And so like my example with my friend Jimmy from grad school, he definitely was in a full board review. I think it took him 3 to 4 months to get approval, mostly because after they had looked at the big parts of his study, then they were like, oh, actually you need to add to the consent form. Oh, actually you need to do this. And so I think it took him a couple times of the IRB meeting. And that's at our school, the IRB met once a month. So if they meet twice a month, then these might be a faster process than if they meet once a month, but it really just depends on your school. Okay, and then finally, any additional IRB, oh, sorry, any additional changes to your study after it has been approved must also be reported back to the IRB committee for another review of risk. So really good example of this is, I was in grad school right when COVID hit, right? I was actually just about to do data collection right when COVID hit. And so I, wanted to look at cortisol levels. I wanted to measure people's spit. I wanted to, get all up in their faces and stuff and do in-person interviews. And obviously with a, viral pandemic that has to do with spit and bodily fluids coming from the mouth, it was probably not a great idea to measure people's cortisol levels through spit. And so I actually had to transition my entire study into an online study. That being said, my IRB had already approved my original study to do it in person. So after I had to change my study, I had to make sure it was all online. I had to change some procedures and stuff. I actually did have to resubmit again, so that the IRB was aware of the changes that I had made. So if anything that like that does happen, obviously, not another global pandemic, knock on wood, but if even something smaller than that, right? You change the instrument that you're using. Oh, I was going to use this survey, but I found this survey afterwards and it's so much better. You need to tell the IRB that, because for all they know, they've approved it, and then you're changing things, and now you're changing things to be unethical, but you had prior IRB approval, which is, unethical. So that's not what we want here. It's like I said at the beginning, it's all about putting the participants first. I know that your study is important. I know that your research is important, and I'm sure it is. But, just like my friend Jimmy, he really loved his research, but he was just like, yeah, actually, you're right. I don't want to completely traumatize my participants. That doesn't sound fun for me or them. And so we just kind of want to avoid doing that. Okay. So that's kind of all the information that I had for you guys today. I'm going to open it up for questions now. So if anyone does have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box up top. Or there's a Q&A box as well, or it might be at the bottom. I don't know where Zoom puts the little drop-down menu things. But while people are asking questions, I just wanted to really quickly go through some information about our company, Statistics Solutions. Sorry, excuse me. I had something in my throat. So Statistics Solutions is a full-service dissertation consulting company. We provide graduate students and professionals with timely editorial support for your dissertations and scholarly projects. So basically, we help with almost everything when it comes to the dissertation process. So we help with chapters 1 through 5. So are you looking to do a literature review? We can totally help you with that. Are you looking to get some help on your methodology? We can absolutely help with that. We also do full results for quantitative and qualitative results, as well as help with the discussion. Additionally, we also help with like survey uploads. We help with creating PowerPoints for your defense, preparing for your defense. And we also do a lot of like APA editing and feedback from committee members with editing, with stuff like that. So if that's something that interests you, if you are interested in obtaining our services or using our help, we would be happy to help you. We have complimentary, so free 30-minute consultations, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. If you are interested, there's some contact info on the screen right now, and I am going to leave this information up while we are answering questions so that everyone has a time to write this down. Awesome. Awesome. And then Melissa, my boss, she put a link to schedule a free consultation in the chat. So thank you about that, Melissa. Really appreciate that. But yeah, I'm looking for questions. I don't see if anyone has any questions, so I'm just gonna wait. Yeah, so you're only talking about human beings. Are animals not concerned in the IRB study? So totally are. I have never done animal testing research or anything like that, so I'm not 100% on the process of that, but it is very similar to the IRB. I believe the IRB does look into those things. I just only really know about human subjects testing and the requirements for that. I'm not really up to date about animal subject testing. But I'm sure they have rules about that. I'm sure it's just as strict, if not even more strict, since animals don't actually have autonomy, unlike human beings. Totally. Next question. If the participants are African American women, they are considered to be a marginalized group. Yeah. Would any additional safeguards need to be put in place because of intersectionality? So it depends, right? And I know it sucks, right? With the it depends answers. People hate it depends, but it does, and I also hate it depends. But it's a really good question. I appreciate you asking it. So yes and no, right? So if your participant pool is African American women and the benefits for the people of the study are going to be majority African American women, right? Like if the benefits of that study really only benefit that population that you're looking at, no, you don't really need additional safeguards because we're not looking at the risk of a marginalized group for the whole of the entire population. However, if instead, though, you are looking at African American women, but you want to generalize your findings to all women, regardless of race, then yes, you will need additional safeguards to be put in place because of intersectionality. So in that case, if we're looking at just one small group of people for the benefit of the whole, then yeah, you're going to have some issues with ethics, and you're probably going to need to put in some safeguards. But if it's just African American women and really the goal of the population is African American women, then not necessarily as important to do that, if that makes any sense. Cool. Okay, got a couple more questions coming in, so let me read those. I intend to collect my own data for the dissertation from high school students in my country. I'm an international student in terms of IRB. How many IRBs do I need? And about consenting, do I need consent from participants' parents, since I'll be collecting from adolescents age 13 to 17? Yeah, so to answer that second part of the question, that's an easy answer. Yes, you'll need consent from participants' parents to collect that data. In terms of how many IRBs do you need, that is a really good question. As a guess, it's probably going to be one. So if you're in multiple institutions, it's going to be one for each institution that you're doing, right? So if you're at an international school, but you're also, working with like maybe an American school for the actual like participant data or high school students, then probably two. But if you're just working at like your international school, and you're getting participant parents to sign consent forms and additional consent forms, you probably just need the one for your school. So it's not about how many IRBs do you need, it's like how many schools do you go to, how many institutions are you going to be at. That being said, though, hospitals do have their own IRBs. So if you're working with a hospital, that is a situation in which you're definitely going to have multiple IRBs, because you're going to need an IRB for the hospital and you're going to need an IRB from your actual school that you're doing the research from. I hope that makes sense in terms of an answer. Next question. how do you work with de-identified information to get an outcome? That is a good question. So I think what you're asking is like basically with okay here let me backtrack a second. So basically with de-identified information, you're not losing any of the participant details. You're not losing any of that information that has to do with age, weight, race, personal details. Like, I mean, I'm sure you're not asking for like people's credit card information. That would be crazy, but you get what I'm saying, right? Like, so maybe one of the questions is that they've done illicit drugs before and you are in a state that does not allow said illicit drug, and they answered yes to that. Basically, to de-identify the data would be to make sure that that illegal activity basically cannot be traced back to that participant's name. So it's not that you're changing the data in any way. You're literally just removing names and adding participant identifiers instead. So it could be like participant 501B. You said that one time they did, marijuana or something like that in a state where it was illegal. Something like that you would need to, de-identify, or, participant, especially if you're working with like hospital data. A lot of the times, we don't want that information, medical information to get back to, um, be placed on a participant, be able to identify who that participant is. We don't want to know that Sally Smith has, some sort of cancer. Instead, we want to know that participant 501B has some sort of cancer. I hope that makes sense, but you'll still definitely be able to get your outcome. It's just about making sure that names and emails and addresses aren't identifiable based on the questions that you're asking. I hope that makes sense. Okay. I'm looking to make sure nobody asked any other questions. Let me look at the participants, all that fun stuff. Okay. I'm not seeing any other questions. That being said, I will stick around for a couple more minutes just to make sure that everyone who does have a question has a chance to ask that question. But if you don't have a question, and no more questions come in, I just wanted to say thank you, everyone, especially those who did ask questions. Y'all asked really insightful questions, and I do really appreciate when people are engaged in these webinars, and people asking really insightful questions is awesome. So I appreciate y'all in that sense. And then I just hope that everyone has a great rest of their day. I hope to, talk to some of y'all soon, working with y'all on your projects and stuff like that. So, yeah, like I said, I'm just going to leave this information back on the screen for a couple more minutes. But other than that, we are basically done. Like I said, I appreciate everyone, and yeah. Just got another question. What part of the South are you from? LOL, y'all. Yeah, I'm actually not originally from the South, which a lot of people then get mad at me for saying y'all, but I've lived in Charleston, South Carolina for about the past like 6-7 years. So y'all has just kind of become a part of my vocabulary. I think it started off ironically, and then because I'm originally from the North, and then the irony became my everyday. That's a funny question. I appreciate that question. I appreciate that, Deborah. Deborah said enjoyed the seminar, learned a lot. You are so Southern. Can't tell from you're from the North, and we won't hold it against you. I appreciate that. I do. I like the North, but I got out of there as quickly as I could because where I was in the North was it was just a small town. I couldn't stand it. So, but yeah. Awesome. Okay, y'all. I'm just seeing a lot of thank yous. I really appreciate the thank yous. Thank y'all. I hope this was a helpful webinar. We also do these webinars all the time. We have a schedule. I believe we post on our website and on LinkedIn. And so we do them on really any topic. We do them on the IRB, addressing feedback, APA formatting is a big one that we do. And then we also do webinars on, data analysis. So how do you present your results effectively? How do you do a literature analysis effectively? That qualitative analysis versus quantitative analysis, stuff like that. And again, Melissa's being awesome, putting that stuff, upcoming webinar schedule in the chat. So if you are interested in any of our upcoming webinars, we would be really happy to have you there as well. Awesome. Well, on that note, y'all, I am going to go ahead and stop screen sharing and end the call. Like I said, I appreciate y'all, and I hope that everyone has a wonderful rest of their day.